Fantastic. Welcome if you're just joining. We're going to give people a couple of minutes to join us this lunchtime. With us today, we've got Nicola Anderson from My Tutor and David Johnson. And we've got one other joining us very shortly. He is in typical sort of remote working, flexible working style, picking up his daughter from nursery. So he will be with us in just a couple of minutes. And this is Rethinking Flexible Working and Gender Diversity in 2021. Right. Right, Mia, I think we've got Brett now. Right, we've got our other panelist joining us in just a moment. He's here. We've typically got some technical issues. But if you are just joining us, we'll be starting in about 2 minutes. And this is Rethinking Flexible Working and Gender Diversity in 2021. We'll be exploring the secrets, and Nicola and David look a bit nervous there, but I'm going to be picking their brains on how they're handling these really complicated topics.
Picking our brains or picking on us?
Picking your brain, just finding out the wisdom, unlocking the wisdom. There we go. That's a millennial term if there ever was one. Right, let me just see if I can get this other panelist up. Right. So for everyone joining, the format is going to be Q&A between myself, Nicola, David, and Brett's going to be joining us soon as well. But we will leave plenty of time for questions at the end, about 15-20 minutes. So if you just submit your questions through the chat, and I'll come to those towards the end, you can direct them to a specific speaker, or I can ask everyone on the panel about what's going on. Right, let's just see if we can get this final panelist on, and then we will kick off.
Here we go.
Hey.
Hi, Brett.
Hi, everybody.
Great.
That was the idiot in front of the computer, not the person running the system. I actually didn't have my video on.
Don't worry, I fell for that the other time as well. Well, great to have you here, and let's get straight into it. So starting with Mr. Putter, so we've got Brett Putter, who is the founder and CEO of Culture Gene. Culture Gene helps you as an organization to define what your values are, what your behaviors are as a company, but most importantly, they really then codify that into the whole process. So that's everything from recruitment, management, and accountability and beyond. We've actually used them, and it's a really fantastic exercise to go through. So Brett's going to be bringing that expertise of working with multiple companies, going through these transitions around flexible working in particular, and giving us his insight from them and his own organization. We've also got Nicola Anderson, who's the Chief Marketing Officer for EdTech My Tutor. Nicola's fantastic, and she's spearheading what is a fantastic organization. So My Tutor connects tutors to parents and students, of course, and they also do a lot of work with schools. So they've been particularly relevant during this homeschooling period, which has been, a really stressful time for parents, and they've offered a lifeline to really help bolster the educational services that have been missing in people's lives. And we've also got David Johnson, who's the UK country manager for Maddiness. Maddiness are a fantastic publication in the whole tech and startup world. And David is spearheading the UK operations here and building a team from scratch. And he's very much a flexible working advocate. And as he's building this team, he's really thinking sensitively about, how do we make a dent on some of these really pressing issues. And the reason that we decided to do this topic today, so I'm Romany Thomas, I'm the founder and CEO of Juggle. We are a flexible working platform. And so the reason that we're interested in flexible working is kind of obvious, but I guess why gender diversity? It's very much my purpose behind the business, and we believe that flexible working is the way to unlock gender diversity. Pre-pandemic, the incremental change to get more women into business leadership positions was very, very slow. I think at the last count, the World Economic Forum said it was going to be close to 100 years before we reach gender parity here, right? So it's super, super slow. And all of the thought leadership coming out and the results that we see is that flexible working is this silver bullet that can really make a change. Now, the sad thing is the pandemic has moved, women's participation in business back considerably. We've all seen the headlines. It's pretty dire. But equally, there's a huge opportunity with the pandemic as well, with all these changing working practices to just, accelerate this change and make that happen in a short period of time. So we're going to be discussing lots of themes. We're connecting those two big ones, flexible working and gender diversity, but it all starts with hiring as well. So these three folk are very experienced in hiring. So we'll be talking through the practical steps that they've put in place in their organizations in order to connect these two issues and get better outcomes. And of course, the mistakes that they've made as well. So you'll be able to learn from them. I'm going to start with Brett. The term flexible working is a broad one. It's possibly even overused now in multiple different contexts. What does that mean for you, Brett?
So flexible working, the way I'm experiencing flexible working is with my clients at the moment, specifically. And one of my clients has 75 people. It's in a software business. They've been going for 6-7 years. And the engineering team are going to be fully remote. Their marketing team are going to come in twice a month. The SDRs in the sales team are going to come in 4 times a week. The account execs are going to come in twice a week.
Wow.
And the professional services team are going to come in once a week, but they're going to decide which day each week. So it's this multi-layered element of, first of all, what do your leadership think they're gonna do? What do the team want to do, and where's the overlap there in terms of allowing for flexibility? And that's just on a day or weekly basis. And then there is, when do you want to work during the day? And with the advent of remote, the requirement for flexibility and asynchronous work are all coming to what I see as this melting point of companies trying to work out what this actually now means. And I don't think there is a one-off, this is what flexible working means, or this is how flexible working is. It really does depend. I was reading about Goldman Sachs, and the CEO of Goldman Sachs, I can't remember, in the last day or two, said that he's insisting that the younger employees do not work on Saturdays.
How kind of him.
Exactly. It's incredibly flexible there, but he's insisting they don't work on Saturdays. So there's all sorts of extremes here.
Yeah.
But I'm seeing this sort of start to take root in companies where the leadership team often think X and actually the rest of the team think Y squared, and it's kind of working that out at the moment. So for me, flexible working is everything up in the air, and now let's work out what works for our company.
Yeah, that's interesting, because you're talking about something which we'll come on to later, but it's this shift in mindset where typically organizations have almost dictated terms, right? And we've all sort of happily gone along with the schedule. And now the onus is moving on to the individual, but it's like, okay, well, is it moving 100% to the individual? How does that then fit and work under the category of a company? That how do you build the culture? So is there a percentage? Is there a rule? And it does sound like people are just still trying to figure out what that customization looks like per organization. So we'll come on to that topic a bit later on. But Nicola, I just want to move over to you on the same question. What does flexible working mean for you as an individual, and also for my tutor?
It's a really interesting question, and I was Googling it earlier, and so many descriptions came up as part-time work. And to me, flexible working doesn't mean you're working 3 days a week or 4 days a week. It's anything outside of the 9 to 5. And it's really playing to your team's strengths, providing you still have the opportunity for teams to collaborate. I think that's what's really key. So that individuals understand, okay, it's flexible work, but there are certain days or certain meetings that I need to be present for. And you find within an organization, there'll be people that are working 4 days a week because maybe they've got childcare or they're doing certain courses. You'll have people that are real morning people. So actually they prefer to start at 8 and finish slightly earlier, or people that are more evening. So they're starting later and finishing later. And you've also got people remote, perhaps in different countries as well, but it's working out what works for that individual and for the business as well. So you might say core hours are 11 till 4, and that's when we're going to have our key meetings, and let's make sure that we're all present for those. Or we're all going to be in the office on a Wednesday and Thursday, and those 2 days are going to be meeting days. There was a really interesting article by the CEO from Zapier saying, we're going to be in the office, but the office is for meeting and collaboration. It's not just being there to work. And I think that's going to be a real differentiator about when you're in the office and when you're actually remote. It's really important that you take that time to collaborate, and that doesn't need to be all the time.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Something that both of you have raised is this almost split culture of remote and not remote. So having employees that are almost fully remote, having some employees that aren't, and the potential tension that comes for that in the business. But that sounds like quite an elegant solution by having, actually, this is what the purpose of the office is, and this is what the purpose of home is. Yeah, I like that a lot. Okay, thanks, Nicola. David, what about you for managing this? And you've obviously got the international collaboration piece as well. What does flexibility mean for the organisation?
I think I'd sort of like to say, and I think Brett kind of threw everything up in the air from my understanding of what flexible working meant, because it's clearly way more complex. For me, it is as simple as empowering people to know that the company wants them to do the best work, and the terms by which they do that work have all been thrown in the air. Flexible working is not a new thing, but obviously with COVID, it's been pushed to the extreme. So I think for me in my role and for the wider company, it's almost now you can't have the flexibility without the empathy and understanding of everyone's individual circumstances. At the same time, you can't spend the whole of your working week working out what works and what doesn't work. So I think you know, it's also flexible. What is flexibility? Is it time? Is it geography? Is it, you know, I don't attend meetings by Zoom, I only do meetings in person. And I suppose all of those are things that, by understanding the individuals, you work out what works for them. And all you can do as an employer is, I suppose, listen to what those are and find a way to get the best out of it.
Yeah, I think you raised a really important objection to flexible working that we saw pretty consistently pre-pandemic. You know, there was always adoption of flexibility, or at least want of it from professionals, but businesses, even progressive ones, were kind of struggling with it. They were like, not sure. And actually, when we dug into the reasons, they were fearful that this was going to add a management overhead. Like suddenly the level of pastoral care, like the level of customization, the sophistication and maturity needed by their managers was going to have to go up a level. And so, of course, there was that resistance to it. I mean, I have some views on overcoming that, but I'd love to hear from you guys what your thoughts are on overcoming that. Nicola, can I maybe start with you?
Yeah, I think one thing that I really picked up on when I first joined my tutor was that there was a couple of individuals in the leadership team who had concerns about trust. They seemed to think that people worked from home when they had other things to do, other appointments, or they were about to go on holiday the next day and were using it to pack. And that was a real concern for me, because actually, when you're hiring people, part of the whole process is that it's somebody that you believe wants the best for the business and for themselves, and that you can really trust them. And I think one thing that lockdown has done, you know, very few positives, but one of them is you realize, well, actually, we can really trust all of our employees. We've hired well, and they're all here to actually do their best. And sometimes it's the opposite. They really want to prove that they can deliver, and it's actually stopping them from working too much. I think the challenge we've had in lockdown isn't that are people working enough, it's actually, are we blurring the boundaries between work and personal life, and are people actually taking enough time out, stopping at the right time, and it's not bleeding into their evenings and weekends, which is going to have an issue with their mental health and all sorts of other things. So I think it's really shifted in terms of, can we actually deliver what we need to deliver? Will we be as productive with remote work? To actually, well, yes, we absolutely are, but we've also got to really look after mental health and well-being as well.
Yeah, makes sense. Brett, what practical steps have you seen companies take in order to shift to that kind of high trust environment where then flexibility and that accountability on the individual becomes, you know, it becomes a natural process?
So I've studied a lot of the fully remote work companies like GitLab, GitHub, Zapier, TopTel, Buffer, and so on. And I've seen that they make sure that they break projects down into tasks, essentially, because there is Andy Grove in High Output Management writes about task relevant maturity, TRM. And task relevant maturity is basically the question, have you done this task before? To what extent? And can you do it again? If you can't, and you are working flexibly or you are working remotely, I'm going to have to monitor you, and or train you or guide you through that process. And so if I understand in this project that I have to monitor and help you progress through these tasks, then I know that you can't do it yourself, and I know that I have to be involved and help you get there. And if I look at the way remote work companies do this, they analyze the project so that they know where they're going to have to get involved, and they know where they don't have to get involved. They fundamentally trust the people they hire to get on with it and do it. And I think this trust element is, a lot of people are learning how to do trust at the moment, because trust was, I trust you because I can see you.
Yeah.
And that goes back to your point about being, you know, about people being unsure of how managers would manage and if there would be more overhead. But actually, I think with regards to that point, if you look at remote work leaders, they're much more coaches than they are alpha rah-rah types. I do think there is a relevant question of how do we create the coaching environment for people who are flexible or people who are working remotely. And so from what I've seen the best companies do is build capability for us to communicate where I may not be able to deliver on this.
Yeah, it sounds like the confidence and competency of like exercising that trust muscle comes from the planning. You know, the devil is in the detail. And as startups, we're, you know, I think sometimes we mistake planning with moving slowly, when actually you're completely right. It enables you to move much faster. It enables you to see the gaps ahead of schedule. So, you know, a good environment for all sorts of reasons. I want to touch on the other big topic that we're going to talk about this afternoon, which is around gender equality. So the pandemic, we've really gone backwards in terms of women's participation in business, in large part to do with the kind of homeschooling situation, the pressures at home, etc. There are other reasons as well, but that's kind of a big one. I guess the question for all of you is, why is gender equality important to, you know, your organizations and business in general? I mean, you're here today, so I'm assuming you feel it is important, but I'd love to actually understand the reasons why. Nicola, can I start with you?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much data out there that just says diverse teams are far more effective and higher performing. Says it all. And also, you want to represent your customer base. I don't think any of us work with a customer base where it's all exclusively male.
Yeah.
So two major reasons. Why would you not make this a top priority?
Yeah, great. Love that. David, what about you guys?
I love that, Nicola, you started with the business reason, right? It makes for a better business. To have a diverse team is better. It's funny, diversity is always sort of hidden behind this gender issue, which outweighs any other discussion, right? We just have to get the balance right. And as Nicola, you said earlier, when you got fed up of appearing on panels for promoting women in tech, where it's only women in tech, actually you're just kind of almost digging a trench rather than collaborating to move forward. For me, I think, you know, I echo Nicola's thoughts. Our readership is not one sex, right? It is diverse, so we have to reflect that. It's also sort of as I suppose any good leader recognizes their own shortcomings, right? So fill those with people who are the best in that space, whatever it may be. And I think, you know, I'm also reluctant to reduce diversity to just gender, because once
totally
you widen it up, it actually gets it way more interesting, brings way more people to the table, and it encourages people to recognize in themselves their own diversities, which I think is a really empowering thing. I think also, anecdotally, we only started Maddiness in English in January of last year. So there's very much a feeling of, we don't have the legacy, we don't have the heritage, we don't need to redress the balance. We can just throw ourselves into, maybe a naively perceived world of equality. And as long as we talk about it in, with diverse contributors, editors, colleagues, and contributors, then we're sort of doing our bit to push things forward rather than perpetuate the debates.
Yeah.
Can I just add one thing in here as well, though? I think David made a really good point. This isn't just about gender diversity. I think a number of startups have challenges I've seen with age being a real issue as well. And I've had people say to me, well, they're not going to hire me because I'm too old, or I've come from a corporate background. I don't fit in the tech space, which is completely illogical, but it's the perception that you get. You have to be young and from a tech background to be able to work in tech. And the second one, it's not just about diversity, it's about the inclusion piece as well. And I think we've seen real challenges in some companies where, yes, we're hitting our quota, but actually when these people join, they don't feel part of the organization and they feel like they're a checkbox being ticked. And that's so important that it's not just about bringing them in, it's about making sure that they feel a real part of that team too.
Yeah, I think what you just touched on is really central to this whole thing, because we see lots of companies go on PR initiatives to hire women, or the broader diversity spectrum as well, and they haven't really thought about the environment. What is it like? Is flexible working a real thing, or are they just playing lip service to it? Are they just going to hand over all of the D&I initiatives to women and people of color straight away, therefore kind of draining them from the energy of their day job straight away? There's lots of sort of I think well-meaning initiatives that just trip up. Brett, can you think of anything that you've seen that just doesn't work in terms of initiatives around gender equality, where people are, it might be well-meaning, they're really trying, but actually it's just a red herring?
I've seen companies try and be more diverse, and what often happens is they on the recruitment side, they will tell their recruiters or tell their internal team to go and find more diverse people, and actually ultimately they don't work hard enough, they don't think hard enough about where to find these people, and ultimately end up fishing in the same pond where you get your white male Oxbridge, whatever it is. And so where I've seen where companies don't sort of think enough outside the box or go broadly enough is actually on the recruitment side. If you fish in the same pond, you're going to catch the same fish. And going beyond that and thinking a little bit outside the box of where to go and find people who could bring more diversity. And what I see in a lot of startups is the startups, they're similar university or similar background, and then at a stage they start thinking, they become aware of this diversity issue, and they think, okay, we need to bring people in now. And actually, ideally, you should have thought of this before, because if you're 20 people and you're all the same, and now you start to bring people in, that first person is going, am I just the token? What are you using me for here? Am I bait? And I just don't think that works. So being broader in your approach and moving quicker to do that, I think avoids those issues.
Yeah, makes loads of sense. Nicola, what are your thoughts on the role that technology can play in I guess, helping companies to recruit and manage a more diverse team?
It's a good question. I mean, I think one thing that really horrified me was I was using a tool to look at how biased my job descriptions were when I worked at Go Cardless, and I was horrified that they were massively skewed towards attracting men. I mean, that is just so embarrassing. And it was because I was using those. I'm really sorry about the building noise, by the way.
That's right. It's classic remote working.
it was because I was using words like rock star, build this, and it was like words that immediately to a woman like, oh, this doesn't feel like me. And it was such a big lesson. And I think tools like that are really important. We also use another tool in Workable, which is our hiring platform, which allows you to mask certain elements of a CV. So we all have a level of unconscious bias, and the worst thing is when you're not aware of it. And so by removing these, it removes that issue. So things like names and other information that could cause that unknown and unwanted bias, but it's still in there. So those are two that we've used. But I think it's not just about technology. I think a lot of it's about training, and Brett, you'll be an expert on this, but we've done a lot of training around unconscious bias, being aware of it, and interview processes as well, because people will pick up on things and judge against them, and they won't know that they're even doing it, because naturally we all gravitate towards people like us. And until that's really highlighted to you, you don't know how to address it. Brett,
Yeah.
you've probably got a whole raft of other ones up your sleeve, being that the area you're in.
Well, we work with our clients to actually try and eliminate as much bias as possible by instead of trying to hire for culture fit, which is impossible, we actually work on hiring for values fit. And if you hire for values fit, then your questions are different and the way you score people are different. And we found that the companies that do this just generate diversity as a function. Obviously, if you're getting the right pool in, the right candidate attraction in, the diversity just happens. It's really amazing how once you remove gut instinct or that feeling about somebody, if you remove that from the equation as much as possible, you get a much more balanced, diverse.
I'm so glad you said values fit, because one thing that I really don't like is this culture fit interview, which to me says, oh, are they exactly like us? And I think it's got to be about culture add or values fit. So I think that's such an important area to focus on.
What can you talk to us? I'd be interested to hear from all of you here, but maybe starting with Brett. What is the difference between the culture fit interview and the values fit interview? Why don't we start with the expert himself, Brett?
It's impossible to hire for culture fit.
Go on.
Because if I ask any leader, and I do this every day, I ask any leader, please accurately define your culture. I may get a little bit of waffle about some of their values and maybe their mission, but actually they can't define their culture, because their culture is this largely invisible, subconscious, intangible thing that they have given tick box exercise to, and they're using the words culture fit as a mask or as a cool phrase for gut instinct hiring. And so your instinct is yours, it's fallible, it's based on how you feel, and do I feel like I would enjoy working with this person or not? Is not a way to evaluate a candidate based on if they should be in your company or not. And the other thing to think about is if you could possibly define your culture when you're 10 people is different to when you're 30, is different to when you're 100, different to when you're 300. And so what are you hiring for? Are you hiring for somebody who can't scale to 30, or you're hiring for somebody who can live with your values and the scaling is irrelevant?
Interesting. So actually when we're saying culture fit, what we're really talking about is pattern recognition. So of course, that's why in large part we've made no progress in terms of diversity, because if we keep focusing on culture fit and just hiring people, not myself, but in general, a lot of the tech companies are run by white men in their 30s and 40s. They're going to just keep hiring people who look like themselves. How do we break the mold? David, do you have any thoughts on how we do that?
I suppose I do. Brett, I think that's fascinating. I don't feel sort of experienced enough in the recruitment process to be able to go into it. But I think what you're saying about culture is so important. It's not about how this person might or might not fit with the culture. It's more, what can you as an individual bring to kind of foster the company culture that we aspire to, that we build our values and goals around. And I made a note that is a question that I would ask. I also feel a bit bad because I don't see it as an unconscious bias, but I know all the people working at Madiness UK and a good number of the freelancers studied at UCL. like myself, albeit a very different me, thankfully, before lots of everyone else, lots of the others. But I had always sort of been proud of that, right? It's something where I felt it was a good place for me to learn, and it's a wonderfully sort of inclusive and diverse place, and it's in London, which is what that represents. But actually now it is just fishing from the same pool, right? Yeah. And I didn't do it in any active way, or perhaps I completely did. So no, I think it's encouraging, to move forward. It's sort of putting the belonging at the center, right, for everyone, and encourage people, recruits, to not let them be defined by where the company thinks they should belong, but actually show what they can bring.
I had a really classic example of this where we had initially a lot of people from Durham University, which is where our CEO is from. I was recruiting for a digital performance manager, and I found the most perfect candidate, and she pulled out. And I was not going to give up. So I called her and said, what's going on? She said, well, it's an education company. Everyone there's been to university. I haven't, so I'm not going to fit in. And one, I managed to convince her to join, which was great. But two, it made me realize that the way we were hiring and the way we were talking was obviously giving that impression. And we're not here as a tuition company to get people into university. We're here to make sure that they can fulfill their potential, whatever that might be. And without us even realizing it, that was the perception we were getting across. And I think so often we're limiting ourselves by looking at where we're recruiting from. We use the same recruiters who use the same pool, we use the same job boards, work in startups, all of these. And so you're missing out on a huge opportunity. If we've got a particularly gender bias or whatever other bias there may be within that pool, then you're already limiting yourself because you can't get beyond that. And so I think one of the biggest learnings from me was actually, where can we find a more diverse group to fill our talent pool? And that's one thing that we monitor in terms of like where our recruiters are sourcing from and where our in-house team are sourcing from. And it's going outside of your comfort zone. Oh, they've worked in tech before, they'll be great. Well, actually, there's fantastic people out there in all sorts of other industries who can add even more because they've got different experiences. And I'd just like to add on, Brett, please can I have you in my pocket next time someone asks me about culture fit, because you were so much more eloquent than I am. I need to have that little clip and then just play it.
Brilliant.
I'm a bit big for your pocket, but I can. I'll write something down for you. I think I interviewed a guy named Nicholas Desain, who is the CEO of Algolia, and one of their values from the very beginning was inclusiveness. And they, after a number of years, looked at this, and they were kind of inclusive, but were actually really exclusive in many, many, many ways. And so what he did with his in-house recruitment team is he said, we will no longer hire white men. Wow. And we will also hire different proportions. So we're not going to find a sweet spot of, for argument's sake, Indian women and just hire only them, or whatever it is. We're going to be very diverse. And actually, they were at 5% diversity in 2 or 3 years ago. And after a year of much harder work from their in-house team, they went to 11% diversity. And that's a big engineering team. It's a lot of people that they brought in. But that was a very deliberate CEO response. In other words, we are not going to do this anymore. And if it slows the business down, it slows the business down. But it's your job to find out a way to not result in us slowing down.
Interesting. Do you see any downside with that approach?
I mean, there could be. You may slow down. You may slow the hiring down, but not if you are going to live your values. No, if you're going to take inclusivity and change it. But if that's one of your values and you have been living it, and you've had this blind spot, almost like David said, you've got this blind spot to certain things, and if you had the blind spots, then you want to eliminate the blind spot. You've just got to work harder at it. You've got to invest in it. So no, I don't. I think that may have a short-term blip, but actually, if you get it right, then it becomes a flywheel that you can speed up. So so yes, maybe in the short term there would be an impact on the business, but over the longer term it would work.
I think
It's
you say
also,
something. Sorry,
go on, Nicola, you go.
I was just going to say, I think you say something really important there, that to have a really diverse and inclusive team, it is hard work. You can't just give it lip service, and it has to come from the top.
Yeah.
It can't be something you just mandate and say, this is what we need to do, and then ignore it. And I've seen that happen in quite a lot of organizations. You know, it's all the rage to say, yeah, we're really focused on diversity and inclusion. You'd have something at the bottom of your job specs and, oh, the job's done then, or just pass it on to recruiters. You've really got to live and breathe it. And it isn't easy, which is why we're not seeing the results we should be.
Yeah. Do the three of you think you know your biases? David's obviously shared his one with us, which was a great one. Nicola and Brett, do you think you know what your personal and company biases are?
I have to work hard not to naturally want to recruit people from other tech companies. It's where I've always worked. I think, especially the startup environment is very different to other environments, but often you need larger company, enterprise, corporate experience, which can add some of what you're missing. And it was quite a big learning for me at Go Cardless, where there were a couple of people that I was like, no, I'm not sure about them, therefore I'm here. And then I interviewed them and brought them onto the team, and they were just absolutely fabulous. And I was like, I so nearly missed out on some really fabulous hires because of my bias. But by that stage, luckily I was aware of it enough that I had to check myself. And I also brought a couple of other people into the interview process to make sure that I was giving them that fair process, and also that I wasn't then doing the opposite and knowing my bias going too far the other way.
What do you do when you get the confirmation bias? So when you hire someone who's not from a tech background, it hasn't worked out. So then obviously your brain's going, that didn't work out, you were right. What's the process that you kind of go through yourself?
I think you have to really understand why it didn't work out. Was it that they weren't a fit? Was it that you weren't actually giving them the opportunity? Were you not setting them up for success? And I think there are always situations where a hire hasn't worked out, where it's both sides. It's not just one individual, the business's fault. And it may be that the business wasn't ready. It may be that the business wasn't open to some of their recommendations. And it could be just that it was a bad fit. And it's understanding, if so, what part of the interview process did you miss out on? And that's why exit interviews are so critical, because you want somebody that wasn't working with them directly to really understand their feedback and their views on that, on why it didn't work out.
Yeah, makes sense. Brett, what about you?
I'm starting to I don't know if this is the right way to describe it, but I'm starting to develop a reverse bias. And a reverse bias is something that I've developed over the last 4 years, and that is my preference to work with female leaders.
Obviously, that's not a bias. That's good sense, no?
No, honestly, it really is the case. So the best experiences I've had in transforming a culture have been with 80% female leaders who have, and this is, I'm going to generalize and get into trouble, but higher EQ, much more control over ego, and really just that sense of their people and what's going to land and what's not going to land, and how do we do this in a slightly different way, or great, let's execute on that and move quickly and hold people accountable. I think that's something that I'm finding more and more. My wife said exactly the same thing. She said, you could have asked me that 4 years ago. I'd have told you that when I started the business. But I think when my first business many years ago was in London, and I actually hired all South Africans because I had the bias for hardworking, hardworking, hard drinking, hard blah blah blah. I've got over that now, mainly because I'm not as hard drinking, but I wouldn't qualify. But no, I think that my preference is definitely towards female leaders.
Awesome. Okay. I mean, if you hadn't noticed, I think my bias might be to women. I realized this about 4 years ago, that I'm not good at hiring women. I don't mean I don't want to hire women, as in I don't put them through a rigorous enough interview process myself, because I emote and I sort of connect with them very, very much. And most of my friends are women. So I have to get a bad cop into the interview situation as well and be quite aware of that. So they're put through their paces, because I don't sufficiently. So that's, I'm sort of the, I'm almost exactly the same, Brett, I get it. We're going to move on to the topic of flexible working, because that's kind of quite central to this theme of inclusion and how we can create a more gender diverse environment in the future. Just a reminder to put your questions in the chat, and we'll come to them in about 5-10 minutes. Just queue them up and we will be with you very soon. So just onto the kind of flexible working piece, guys. You know, there's been a lot of talk about moving to a high trust and more of an output based environment, versus sort of input and time in. But how realistic is that when business in general, even progressive ones, we're steeped in a culture of time? Is that the right way to be thinking about things? And how do we make the adjustment? David, I'm going to go straight to you.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one, because sort of before launching the UK mainness, it exists in France, where it's even more entrenched in the 35-hour week. The kind of the rights of the workers are very strong and very entrenched, to the point that I think when I started and I read our staff handbook, it said, you know, just don't even bother sending emails at the weekend. And I thought that, in a way, I thought, oh, that's quite progressive. It's like when you see the email signature saying, you know, I work a flexible week, so I'll respond on my terms. I hope that's okay. And I thought, you know, that's really great. And of course, the reality of it today here in the UK is far from it, right? For me, I've got 3 kids who have been homeschooled, who go between different other ex-parents, different times of the week. I mean, it is the kind of the absolute juggle, right, in my life. And when you throw work into the mix as well, so I mean, for me, it comes back to understanding, right? I need my team to understand that I may be on the school run at certain times, and then a bit will pick up later. And I want to sort of express that same understanding from me to them in terms of their life. You know, I know one of our writers gets up super early, and by about 12 o'clock she has a little bit of a mini burnout, and then picks up a little bit later after a nice afternoon walk. For me, that's absolutely fine. Understanding that empowers them to do it, and empowers me to understand why the process is happening that way. I do, however, think, you know, it's so important that the communication is there, that the channels are set for communication. So we have a sort of arbitrary email, not that important, Slack, important, WhatsApp, oh my God, this is really super important, right? So having those different kind of layers of communication is vital. And then, you know, it's funny, the more I think about it, the more I think what a great position we are as a company in the UK to sort of bring these things into the DNA today, to as we build and scale and grow, we'll be able to deal with those issues of, you know, when you hit what's it like going from a team of 5 people to a team of 50 people. Because I know in France we've had, you know, discussions and issues around that, around, you know, how to keep the kind of family DNA when actually you've got a team of 50 plus people. It is a changing dynamic. So yeah, I think flexible is the future, but it needs to, there will always need to be some kind of element of rigidity, whether that's to kind of please the employment contract writers, or to please the people who actually really do prefer working Monday, Friday, 9 to 5.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a good point that you just raised around employment contracts, because the whole structure of work, you know, from employment contracts to how we were, everything is very much structured around time, which is kind of why I asked the question around output versus input. It's a nice word, but like Nicola, how realistic do you think it is that we move 100% to just looking at output rather than thinking about time as a concept as well?
I think it's a balance, and I also think it really depends on the function you work in. Like, it would be kind of tricky if you have an operations team where you have customer support between 9 and 8, and they're all doing different hours, and they all decide to start working different hours. So it does depend on your role. Similar for sales teams, you know, they need to be available when their clients are available, and that may be different hours depending on the markets they're working with, but you still need to know that there is a salesperson or a customer service person dealing with queries as they're coming in. So I think it's a balance. I also think it's important that there are times when you can collaborate. So if everyone's off doing their own thing and working their own hours, it becomes much, much harder to bring people together. So there are set hours, set meetings that I expect all of my team to attend. And I think if you can have that balance where these are, as I was saying earlier, these are the times when we're going to be in the office, as and when we have an office space again. These are the times when we're collaborating. These are the set meetings. Outside of that, let's work together to understand what's best for you. But I think it all comes down to communication, because what you need to be doing is saying, actually, can I change my hours to this? As long as the team around know, then they're not going to make asks on you. If you're actually shifting to start working 8 till 4, say, and you don't tell the rest of the team, then obviously they're going to have expectations outside of that. I think the other thing just to add is, you know, going back to the points around mental health and that blurring between work and home life, is that, again, it's something you do need to lead from the top. If you want to make sure that people don't feel that my progression here all depends on the hours I'm working, you have to be very conscious about not suddenly sending out a ton of emails with requests over the weekend. If it's your time to write them, great, keep them in draft and then send them Monday morning. So I think it's about creating that culture from the top and really living it as well.
Yeah, really good point. We're going to come on to some questions now. I'm going to start with Brett. How do you motivate a remote team?
I think your role as a leader is not to motivate. I think your role as a leader is to create an environment for your people to work well and to be able to fulfill their potential, to create the environment where they can do their best work and be their best selves. I think if you have to motivate people, you are possibly dealing with young, inexperienced people, or you're dealing with people who are not engaged and not necessarily committed. But I can't think of a leader of a high-performing team that needs to motivate, unless it's a we need to put in 36 hours in the next 24 to get this out, and come on everybody, let's get together and do this. But I can't think of motivating a remote team tells me that there's a problem in the team. It's the wrong people or the wrong job or the wrong something to be able to have to get over that.
Yeah, it's almost reframing the question, right? Looking at the hiring, looking at the people, looking at the environment. Nicola, you talked about this quite a few times throughout the session around actually a lot of employees are approaching burnout because we have all, I think, hired teams who are generally pretty committed individuals. They're hardworking, they're aligned to our company values, and so they want to do a great job, right? And obviously the downside of that is they get burnt out. And I know I've been telling my team to be taking holidays, which is tough because they've got nowhere to go. How are you guys tackling that at My Tutor?
I have to say, I think our head of people's done a really great job here. Actually, we have a wellness committee, and that ranges from everything from having like meditation and yoga sessions at lunchtimes. We've had external parties come in, and we actually had a session on burnout last week, which was really talking through how to understand if you're getting close to that point. We've had sessions on like time management, the work-life balance, and we also have sessions from people within the business as well, talking about some of their challenges. And I think hearing it from your colleagues allows you to be able to open up and really talk about it. We have a counselling coaching company as well that anyone can arrange a session with, and we're really trying to bring in a coaching culture. I'm a trained coach, so I do a lot of training with the managers and really trying to bring that in. And I think what's really key as well is 2 initiatives that have really made a difference. One is, for those of you that use Slack, we absolutely love the virtual donut. So really trying to get communication going through different departments, different individuals. And for me, I find it the most motivating thing. I was speaking yesterday to one of our engineers who's currently in Latvia, and you don't talk about work. I think we were talking about film and all sorts of other things. It's just really nice to connect with other people. Particularly, we've been growing, you know, we've trebled in size since lockdown. And so lots of people haven't met each other. So that's a really important initiative. And also just doing regular pulse check-ins. So surveys to really see how everyone's feeling and how we can best help them.
Yeah, there's definitely a theme that's come up a few times here around the future of managers almost transforming into be more coach-like. And Nicola, you said you were a coach. Brett, I know that you touched on that as well. And David, it sounds like you take more of that kind of passive is the wrong word, but more like a check-in type person. Make sure that the environment's set up. I think that's a really important takeaway. You know, if you're managing, then perhaps actually it's time to relook at that, and it's more about the planning and then coaching, making sure that people can get the best out of things. Nicola, you touched on that as well, but I know David's actually hired someone through us, so I'm going to go straight to him about actually hiring someone in a remote environment, right? And this is what we're in now for the foreseeable. What advice would you give to people on the call today about how to do that, how to create that onboarding experience for someone in a remote environment?
It's funny that as we were planning this webinar, I was made to realize that actually I probably haven't done it that well. We did the recruitment brilliantly. We used Juggle Jobs upon recommendation, and had a great selection of people, and are delighted with Kirsty, my colleague, who joined us early December last year, mid-December. And we had this moment, it was just a couple of weeks ago, where she told me that she'd passed her probation. And I said, oh, that's fantastic. I mean, you know, well, there's no worries from my side. This is great. You know, it's business as usual. Congratulations. Thinking, oh God, this would be kind of potentially cause for celebration, or at least an email, or at least a reminder in my calendar to recognize what is a real landmark in someone's career, right? When you join a company, that can loom over you. So I don't think we've done it that well, but you know, I don't want to put everything down to COVID. Strangely, we all dealing with how, going back to the question of what companies have put in place to look after their staff. Nicola, I'm blown away by all the different initiatives you have set up and you've been involved in. We've all moved house during lockdown, which has got to be like the most ridiculous and stressful and unpleasant thing to be doing at any time of life, let alone when you're starting a new job and living in a global pandemic. But it has, I think, given us all a kind of another level of discussion, empathy, something outside of just work, and a kind of understanding, and almost that kind of silly thing of, well, let's have a look around then. Let's see what's it like. What are you doing? Just getting a kind of feel for where people are. I mean, I do like the ideas of you know, the care packages, the onboarding kit, the jumpers, the bottles, the business cards, all of that, receiving it. But they can sort of almost be a bit like tokenistic, and I don't know if it's necessarily, especially for you know, early stage startups, is that really where you want to be putting the money? I'd rather be investing time in that person than sending them a box load of USB keys and water bottles. But that, in a way, is maybe me trying to cover up for the fact that I don't feel that we've done it particularly well.
No, I like it. I like the honesty, and I actually have to agree with you there. I think that the feedback that we've seen from doing it ourselves and seeing other companies as well is you can spend a lot of time on the wrong things. But actually getting someone onboarded is about you know, making sure that they're welcome, and actually that they understand the role and they've got the right kit. Like getting those basics right is very important. I'm going to move to the final two questions, starting with Brett. What's exciting you about the role of technology in the future of work? Right, we've kind of had the history. It was pretty male dominated. In the West, certainly, it's very white. We worked in offices, and technology in the pandemic is kind of transforming all of that. What specifically is exciting you about what can change?
I think one of the things that's going to be harder to do is collaborate, and collaborate well. I think the way people used to collaborate will change with remote or hybrid. And so I'm really excited to see what people come up with around this area of collaboration. For me, there is a really big, massive hole around collaborating on Zoom, and you know, you go onto Zoom and you share a couple of links or something, and you close the page and it's gone. And yes, you can record the Zoom, but it's the context and the value that should be in that meeting for the company is lost. You know, all of these areas where I think remote companies do so well, and they've sort of hacked together their own things, are where companies are going to find new solutions now, so that hybrid works better, and so that various elements of hybrid for me are solved, because it's a big, I don't think leaders are thinking through that you really need to be different. You need to work differently in a hybrid environment. You need to lead differently in a hybrid environment. So I just see an opportunity, or opportunities there, for technology to solve the issues that leaders don't even know are coming.
Yeah, no, I love that. Nicola, what about you? What's really exciting you about how technology can change things?
I think it's just that we've really shown over the last year that we can work remotely. And I think that gives us the opportunity to hire from a much more diverse pool of candidates. You know, previously we always had everyone had to be based in London, and by that very nature, you're limiting yourself. So suddenly we can open up to a much broader audience, and create an environment where it's allowing us to easily recruit. Well, I won't say easily because it's never easy, but it gives us a much better chance of having a more diverse employee base.
Yeah, makes total sense. David, what about you?
I think there's a big part of me that's quite excited to see what the kind of the future of the standard meetup in London is going to look like. And I say London, kind of, you know, I could have said Spitalfields. I think it's going to be interesting to see how that evolves. And again, I think, like Brett's, a sense of real opportunity for creating the hybrid or digital kind of options, which are going to be what we come to accept as completely normal. And I think at the moment we're all now bored of Zoom and nostalgic for just seeing people whatever venue, wherever it might be. But I think there's going to be a lot of real kind of finessing and improvement and kind of embracing new technologies to do that. I also think, and it's something we've kind of touched on quite a lot, about how kind of bosses can become mentors. I think there's been this kind of void in our lives where we're not having that contact with people, and it's been quite interesting seeing how some very savvy brands have kind of stepped in to communicate with their consumers in a more kind of hand-holdy, I'm here to listen and help kind of way, sort of almost filling that void. And I sense there's a bit of an opportunity for employers to really step up their game, and they can be doing it through, you know, companies like Peppy, the it's a well-being company giving support and employees backed by the company. So the company kind of driving new, like, pastoral care for their team through technology. I think that's going to be really interesting to watch.
Yeah, I love that. It's almost wider access. It's humans do what they're good at and leverage technology to get there. Final question. So the World Economic Forum said that it's going to take 99 years to reach gender parity in political and economic leadership. We have said at Juggle that it's going to take 10 years. What's your prediction, Brett?
I hope you hit 10. I don't think it'll take 100, but I do think that it'll be, I would guess 25.
25. Okay, that's not bad. 25. David?
I'm going to side with Juggle on this, but also I think it's quite interesting. It makes me think of the net zero, the kind of the the competitiveness that came about with companies predicting when they would be net zero, and then it almost becomes a kind of, oh, you know, Microsoft have said 2020 we're going to do it, or 2040 we're going to do it by 2035. I think 10's achievable, but you know, I'd rather be I don't know, living that world rather than kind of making a sort of competitive agenda.
Yeah, well, we got to adopt a lot of the tips from today in order to do it. Nicola, optimist, pessimist? You got to put a number on it.
I'm with Brett. I think it's going to be 25 to 30 years, because I think some industries are really going to embrace it, and other it's going to be a real struggle. And unless you do something like Norway, where it's mandated and you get penalised for not having a diverse organisation, I think there'll be a lot of lip service and it's not actually delivered.
25 to 30 is a lot better than 100, guys, though. So,
it is. It definitely is better, but it's 3 times longer than your 10. So
yeah, we might have no, we're going to get there, because we're going to adopt all of these things that you've said around bias and flexible working. Thank you to everybody who's been on the call. We're going to share the highlights and notes with you later today, and we'll make sure that you have access to pick up with David, Nicola and Brett if you want to as well. Thank you so much for your time. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon. And David, Nicola and Brett, thank you so much for a stimulating conversation.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks, Ron.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.